foreign affairs commentator Douglas Herbert. And Doug, I was just talking about what might be happening behind the scenes, but we are waiting now for a press conference with Lloyd Austin and Yoav Gallant, who's the Israeli Minister of Defense. What do you think publicly we might be hearing from Austin?
Publicly, we are going to be hearing that his commitment to Israel, as the U.S. policy has it, Israel's, quote, right to defend itself, is unwavering. The commitment is not in doubt right now. The U.S. is going to stay full-throated support for Israel. Nor are we going to hear any threats of the U.S. conditioning, that is, making its military aid to Israel conditional on Israel's behavior on the battlefield. Officially, the U.S. policy remains exactly as it has been. Israel must do whatever it takes to eliminate Hamas. However, all of that said, all of that taken in context, what he is there to do is say, given those objectives, you now need to find a way to stop killing so many civilians in Gaza. He might not say it in those terms explicitly, but what he's essentially there to do is he's trying to check in on Israeli military officials to find out what measures they are taking to, as Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, has put it in the past few days, to transition to a new phase of the war in Gaza. What would that new phase look like in the U.S. sort of vision of it? It would be a lower intensity, much more hyper-localized. What does that mean? Not this heavy bombardment, non-precision, just striking as a lot of the world sees it indiscriminately, even though the Israeli army says it is anything but indiscriminate. We take all measures to protect civilians. That said, the U.S. is looking for the use of more precision-guided munitions, a more localized strategy, a strategy that does not take out all of these civilians as collateral damage because Israel says, well, it's inevitable, sadly, because Hamas uses civilians and embeds them among its fighters, so they suffer. It's Hamas's fault. What the U.S. is saying, put that aside. We don't care what Hamas does with the civilians. Mm-hmm. What we do care about is what measures you take specifically to prevent what the U.S. and more people in the world are seeing as unacceptable rates of civilian deaths and injury, according to Hamas-run health ministry, nearing 20,000. Not there yet, but nearing that. Over 50,000 injured. Get those numbers down. Joe Biden has said in the past few days, Israel has to do more to protect civilians in Gaza. Yes, he supports Israel. Do more to protect civilians. This is going to be the essence of Austin's message here. We want to see you, and we also want to know what the timetable is. When are you going to shift to that more precision, localized phase of war, away from the heavy bombardment that we're seeing, these so-called dumb bombs, towards something that goes specifically after the Hamas fighters and the Hamas leadership? That's what he's going to be looking for. And at the same time, this is why it becomes, if not mission impossible, mission extremely difficult, get Israel to get more humanitarian aid in. Mm-hmm. Let more aid in, because that is also critical to this war conflict right now.
And this press conference that we're waiting for with Lloyd Austin will be held alongside Yoav Gallant, the Israeli Minister of Defense. He's not an uncontroversial figure. He's the person at the beginning of this war who used the phrase human animals when talking about people in Gaza. Yeah. Do you think he will be listening today to that message from Lloyd Austin?
He'll be listening, but remember, he's still going to be taking his marching orders ultimately from Benjamin Netanyahu and the ultra-nationalist, right-wing, far-right government that he is essentially enthralled to, because he is doing the bidding of the far-right ministers in the government. Now, people might argue that he's also doing his own bidding, because by doing their bidding, he's also, perhaps he thinks, enabling himself to have a better chance of staying in power. Whether that is or is not the case, we right now have a foreign minister there who's dead set against a ceasefire, as is the rest of the Israeli government. They still continue to maintain that a ceasefire, whether a sustainable ceasefire or an immediate ceasefire, a long-term, a medium-term, whatever ceasefire will play into the hands of Hamas, allowing them to regroup, to re-equip, to become even a greater danger potentially down the road. So they're not going to hear the ceasefire talk. They will, perhaps, by necessity, be more open to hearing Austin's thoughts about how specifically to transition to a different type of, as I was saying, more localized strategy, targeting specifically Hamas militants and leadership. I will put the caveat in there that the Israeli military historically, traditionally, does not like being dictated to. They believe that they have perhaps one of the most, if not the most professional militaries in the world. They constantly are repeating this, and that they alone know the realities of living in that region, surrounded by enemies as they see it, and having to protect themselves, which is why they are historically very hesitant, reluctant, to say the least, to take advice from anyone when it comes to how they should wage their military campaigns. Even their closest ally that gives them billions and billions of dollars in military aid a year, even the United States right now, is at risk of being snubbed by Israel's highest security officials and leadership.